The screaming had stopped 3 hours ago, but Commander Vex Meridian could still hear it echoing through the corridors of the Hegemony Research Station. Not the normal screaming that was expected when the Vorthic Collective performed their consciousness extractions. This had been different. This had been wrong. The human strapped to the extraction table wasn't moving anymore. Meridian pressed her scaled palm against the observation window, watching the biomonitors flatline one by one. Subject 7429 formerly. Lieutenant Cade Torn of the Terran Defense Corps lay motionless as the Vorthic's neural parasites completed their grisly work. Extraction successful, hissed Technician Rixville, his serpentine head bobbing with satisfaction. Human consciousness completely severed. Neural pathways cleansed. The specimen is ready for implantation. Meridian's amber eyes narrowed. In her 40 cycles serving the Vorthic Collective, she'd overseen thousands of these procedures. Captured enemy soldiers, civilian rebels, even fellow hegemony officers who questioned orders all had their souls torn out and replaced with Vorthic neural symbionts. It was the Collective's most efficient method of creating perfect soldiers, beings with all their original skills and memories, but absolute loyalty to the Vorthic cause. What humans had always been problematic. Begin phase 2, she ordered, though something in her gut warned against it. The Vorthic had been at war with the Terran Coalition for 18 standard years. What had started as a territorial dispute over the Kappa Centauri system had escalated into something far more sinister. When the Collective discovered humans possessed something unique, a consciousness that burned brighter than any other species they'd encountered. Human souls, when properly harvested, could power their dimensional weapons for decades. Rixville slithered to the control console, his forearms dancing across the interface. Initiating symbiont insertion. Preliminary scans show the human's neural architecture is unusual. How unusual? Meridian leaned forward, studying the readouts. The human's brain patterns were unlike anything in their databases. Where most species showed orderly neural networks, the human's pathways seemed to spiral inward, creating fractal patterns that hurt to look at. Directly, consciousness extraction appears complete, but there are anomalies. Rixvelle's voice carried a note of uncertainty. The neural void isn't empty. Something else is filling the space. On the table, Lieutenant Torn's body convulsed. The biomonitors, which had been silent for the past hour, suddenly exploded with activity. But these weren't normal human readings. The energy signatures were off the charts, registering patterns that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Abort the procedure, Meridian commanded, but it was too late. The symbiont insertion apparatus sparked and died. Emergency lights bathed the laboratory in crimson, as containment fields throughout the station began fluctuating. Whatever was happening to the human was affecting systems 3 decks away. Commander, Rixvelle's voice cracked with panic. The subject's neural patterns are. They're not Vorthic. They're not human either. They're something else entirely. Torrens' eyes snapped open, but they weren't the brown eyes that had glared defiantly at his captors. During interrogation, these eyes were black, not the absence of color, but the presence of something that absorbed light itself. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made the station's hull vibrate. "You took my soul," he said, sitting up on the table as restraints meant to hold a raging chromax simply dissolved. "But you left the door open, and now something has come through." Meridian's hand moved to her sidearm, but her fingers wouldn't respond. The human, or whatever it had become, turned those impossible eyes toward her. "My name was Cade Torren. I was a husband, a father, a man who believed in protecting the innocent." The thing that had been Torren stood, and reality seemed to bend around him. "You stole that from me. You murdered everything I was." The station's lights flickered as energy discharges raced along the walls. In the distance, Meridian could hear alarms blaring and the sound of her crew scrambling to emergency stations. "But in taking my humanity, you've made room for something far worse." Torren smiled, and the expression was terrible to behold. Something that's been waiting at the edge of creation for exactly this opportunity. The last thing Meridian saw before the lights went out was the human's form beginning to change, his outline becoming fluid, extending into dimensions that shouldn't exist. In the darkness, she heard him whisper, "Now you're going to learn what happens when you try to chain the void itself." The emergency klaxons wailed as Commander Meridian stumbled through the darkened corridors. Herska led hands leaving phosphorescent trails on the walls. Behind her, the sounds of reality tearing apart grew louder, metal screaming as it bent into impossible shapes. The wet slithering of something vast moving through spaces too small to contain it. All stations, report, she barked into her comm unit, but received only static in response. The station's quantum mesh network was down, leaving 2,000 hegemony personnel cut off from Central Command. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with Security Chief Grom, a massive Kitherian whose rock-like carapace was scored with fresh burn marks. Behind him, 3 of his officers clutched weapons that still glowed with residual energy. "Commander," Grom's voice boomed through his chest resonator. "Something's loose in Laboratory 7. We've lost contact with the entire research wing." "It's the human," Meridian said, checking her sidearm's charge. "The extraction went wrong. We need to contain." A sound like reality sobbing echoed through the station's ventilation system. The lights flickered back on, revealing corridors that had somehow become longer, walls that curved in directions that defied geometry. Through the observation windows, Meridian could see stars that weren't there moments before ancient, dying suns that cast sickly purple light across the station's hull. "Containment teams to Research Wing 7, she ordered. "Full combat load. Dimensional anchors at maximum power." The journey to the research wing took 20 minutes through corridors that should have been accessible in 5. The station's internal geometry had become fluid, with passages that led in circles and doors that opened onto the same rooms from different angles. Meridian's tactical team of 12 elite hegemony soldiers moved in tight formation, their weapons trained on shadows that seemed to move independently of their light sources. They found the first body at the intersection of corridors Delta and Epsilon. Technician Rixavel lay spread across the floor, his serpentine form twisted into a configuration that would have been impossible if his bones were still solid. His eyes were gone, replaced by perfect spheres of absolute darkness by the collective, whispered Trooper Fen, a young Vorthik whose neural crown flickered with agitation. What could do this? Meridian knelt beside the corpse, her scanner revealing readings that made no sense. Rixavel's molecular structure was intact, but his consciousness had been completely stripped away, not extracted like in their procedures, but simply erased, leaving nothing behind but empty matter. "Movement ahead," reported Grom, his massive frame blocking most of the corridor. "Multiple contacts, but the scanners aren't reading them as life forms." They advanced carefully, weapons ready. The research wing had been transformed into something, from a nightmare walls that pulsed with veins of dark energy, floors that rippled like water, and ceiling that had become a window into a void filled with watching eyes. The first attack came without warning. Shadows peeled themselves from the walls, taking the form of their fallen comrades. The false Rixavel moved with inhuman speed, his claws extending into monofilament edges that could cut through powered armor. Trooper Fen's scream was cut short as the shadow thing bisected him with surgical precision. "Form up, overlapping fields of fire," Meridian shouted, her plasma rifle spitting coherent energy bolts. The shadows recoiled from the weapon's fire, but they didn't die, they simply reformed, learning from each encounter. Grom's boulder cannon roared, sending chunks of crystallized stone through the attacking shades. Where the projectile struck, reality reasserted itself briefly, forcing the shadows back into 2 dimensions. But for every shadow they destroyed, 2 more emerged from the station's increasingly twisted architecture. "Commander," Trooper Vex called out, pointing toward the laboratory doors. "There." The thing that had been Lieutenant Kate Torrance stood in the doorway, but human was no longer an adequate description. His form shifted between states, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, sometimes existing in more dimensions than the eye could process. Around him, the air itself seemed to burn with cold fire. "You came to contain me," he said, his voice now a chorus of harmonics that made the station's hull vibrate. "But I am beyond containment. I am the space between spaces, the dark that defines the light." Meridian raised her weapon, but the plasma bolt passed through Torrance' form without effect. He smiled, and the expression was terrible to behold. "Your weapons are designed to destroy matter, energy, even consciousness itself, but I am none of those things now." He gestured, and half of Meridian's team simply ceased to exist, not kill, not vaporized, but edited out of reality as if they had never been. "I am the price of your hubris," Torrance continued, his form growing larger, more terrible. "For 18 years, you've torn souls from their bodies, thinking consciousness was just another resource to be harvested, but you never wondered what happens to the void you create." The remaining soldiers opened fire with everything they had: energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, even a molecular disruptor that could unmake the atomic bonds of any target. Nothing touched him. The thing that had been torn simply absorbed their attacks, growing stronger with each assault. "Now you'll learn," he whispered, and the station around them began to scream. The hegemony station Dominion's reach was dying. What had started as a routine consciousness extraction had become a reality-warping nightmare that threatened to tear a hole in the fabric of space-time itself. Commander Meridian crouched behind an overturned console in the station's central command deck, watching her displays register impossible readings. "Fleet Command, this is Meridian. We have a Code Omega situation requesting immediate evacuation and dimensional bombardment." Her voice cracked with desperation as she spoke into her emergency transmitter. The response came through layers of static. "Negative, Commander. Asset to valuable to lose. Contain and study. Reinforcements en route." Meridian wanted to scream. 300 of her crew were already dead. At Fleet Command still thought this was a manageable situation. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The entity that had been Lieutenant Torin was no longer confined to the research wing. It had spread throughout the station like a cancer, converting matter into extensions of itself. The walls bled darkness, and the corridors had become a maze that existed in more dimensions than human minds could process. Worse, the dead weren't staying dead, they were being recycled. Their consciousness-stripped bodies becoming puppets for something vast and hungry. "Movement on Deck 12, reported Tactical Officers Wren." Her chitinous fingers dancing across her scanner. 37 contacts, but they're reading as familiar energy signatures. Meridian's blood ran cold. Deck 12 was where they stored the bodies from previous extractions, thousands of hollow shells, awaiting disposal if the entity had found them. "Sir," called out Communications Specialist Forth, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "I'm receiving transmissions from the dead. They're asking for help." The main display flickered to life, showing security feeds from throughout the station. What Meridian saw made her stomach turn. The extraction subjects, beings from dozens of species who'd had their souls torn away, were moving through the corridors with purpose. But these weren't the mindless shells they'd been before. Something was looking out through their eyes, something that recognized her. "Hello, Vex," said a voice she recognized. Dr. Pellix, a hegemony scientist who'd been executed for questioning the ethics of the extraction program. His consciousness had been torn out 6 months ago, his body incinerated. But there he was on the screen, his form reconstructed from the station's matter reserves. "You remember me, don't you? You watched them tear my soul apart because I dared to suggest that consciousness wasn't property to be owned." Pellix's image smiled, but it was Torin's terrible expression on the dead scientist's face. "I'm speaking through the void now, through the space where souls used to be, and I remember everything." More faces appeared on the screen's victims of the collective's extraction program, their forms rebuilt from memory and shadow. Humans, Vorthek, even fellow hegemony officers who'd been disappeared for political reasons. All of them spoke with the same voice, the same terrible intelligence. "You created me," they said in unison. "Every soul you tore away, every consciousness you murdered, every void you left behind, it all added up to something new, something that remembers what you took." The station shuddered as the entity's influence spread. Meridian could feel reality becoming thin around them, the barriers between dimensions wearing away like tissue paper. Through the hole, she could see space itself changing, stars rearranging themselves into patterns that hurt to look at, nebulae forming spirals that extended into impossible directions. "Bridge to engineering," she called out. "Initiate emergency core containment. We need to evacuate immediately." Engineer Krex's voice came through the comm, distorted by interference. "Can't comply, Commander. The core isn't responding to our commands. It's singing. The whole engineering section is singing." On the tactical display, Meridian watched as the entity's influence reached the station's power core. The quantum reactor that had faithfully served for 30 years was being converted into something else, a lighthouse beacon transmitting into dimensions that existed between the spaces. "In atoms, it's calling to them," whispered Wren, her eyes wide with horror. "The signal is reaching other hegemony stations, other facilities where we perform extractions." The communications array exploded with incoming signals. Stations throughout the sector were reporting similar incidents, extraction subjects rising from the dead, reality becoming fluid, the void between spaces taking on malevolent intelligence. The collective's greatest weapon was turning against them. Fleet Command, This is Meridian. Cancel the reinforcement order. Evacuate all personnel from extraction facilities. The entity is spreading through the quantum communication network. Repeat, it's spreading through the network, but it was delayed. On the main display, she could see the first of the hegemony reinforcement ships dropping out of hyperspace, a full battle fleet led by the Dreadnought Supremacy. 300 vessels, 40,000 crew members, all arriving to face something that existed beyond the reach of conventional weapons. "Welcome," said the voice of the dead, broadcast on all frequencies. "I've been waiting for you." The entity that had been torn manifested on the bridge, its form now a writhing mass of shadow and memory that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Where it touched the deck plating, reality bled away, revealing the infinite darkness underneath. "You took my soul," it said, its voice now the chorus of millions, but in doing so, you gave me access to something far greater. I am the collective unconscious of every being you've murdered. I am the space between thoughts, the pause between heartbeats, the void that defines existence itself. The battle fleet opened fire, their weapons lighting up space with destruction. But the entity simply absorbed the energy, growing larger, more terrible. With each attack, it became more real, more present in their dimension, and now, it whispered, "I'm going to show you what happens when the dead remember how to hate." Admiral Keysen Vorthal had commanded the hegemony's 7th Fleet for 23 years. He'd broken rebel uprisings, conquered 17 star systems, and never lost a single engagement. But as he watched his weapons fire pass harmlessly through the entity surrounding the research station, he realized he was facing something beyond his experience. "All ships, cease fire," he commanded from the bridge of the Supremacy. The Dreadnought's quantum cannons fell silent, their last barrage having only served to make the shadow thing larger and more terrible. "Sir," reported Tactical Officer Mirren, her voice tight with fear, "the entity is learning. Each time we attack, it adapts. Our weapons are becoming less effective with each salvo." Vorthal studied the tactical display, his strategic mind racing. The thing that had emerged from the research station wasn't just defending itself. It was actively converting his fleet's weapons fire into something else. Energy became shadow, matter became void, and each destroyed ship added its crew to the entity's growing chorus of the dead. "Analysis complete," called out Science Officer Tech from his position at the sensor ray. "The entity appears to be composed of negative space, the absence of matter and energy given form. It exists in the quantum foam between dimensions, using our reality as a framework to maintain coherence. Recommendations? Unknown, sir. We're dealing with something that shouldn't be possible. The only comparable phenomenon in our databases is theoretical, the concept of a consciousness virus that could spread through quantum entanglement networks." Vorthal's blood ran cold. The hegemony's entire fleet was connected through quantum communication rays. If the entity could spread through those networks, communications, broadcast on all frequencies, fleet-wide order, disconnect from the quantum mesh, all ships to manual communication only, immediate implementation. But as his communications officer reached for the controls, the entity struck. The Supremacy's quantum array erupted in sparks as something vast and malevolent poured through the connection. The lights on the bridge flickered, and when they stabilized, Vorthal found himself looking at the faces of the dead. "Hello, Keysen," said Commander Meridian, her image appearing on the main screen. But this wasn't the Meridian he'd known for 10 years. This was her consciousness, stripped and hollow, puppeted by something that remembered her every fear and regret. "You sent me to die," she continued, her voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate. "You knew the extraction program was unstable. You knew the risks. But you sent me anyway because the collective needed its weapons." Similar faces appeared on screens throughout the fleet. Dead officers, executed dissidents, extraction subjects, all of them speaking with the same terrible intelligence. The entity had access to every consciousness the hegemony had ever torn apart, and it was using their memories as weapons. "Sir," whispered Mirren, "the entity is inside our networks. It's everywhere." Vorthal could see it spreading through his fleet like a plague. Ship after ship went dark as their quantum cores were converted into dimensional anchors, their crews joining the entity's collective consciousness. The massive dreadnought Retribution simply ceased to exist. Its matter reorganized into a pattern that extended into 7 dimensions. "All ships, execute Protocol Omega," Vorthal commanded. "Sever all connections. Prepare for dimensional displacement." Protocol Omega was the hegemony's last resort, a controlled implosion of space-time. That would drag everything within a light year into a dimensional pocket. It would destroy the fleet, but it might contain the entity before it can spread. The other systems, sir, Tech called out, his voice cracking with terror. The entity isn't just spreading through our networks. It's using the extraction subject's memories to locate every hegemony facility. It knows where we keep our prisoners, our research stations, our breeding programs. The tactical display lit up with new contacts ghostly ships that existed in the spaces between reality, crewed by the consciousness stripped dead. They were appearing throughout the sector, moving toward hegemony installations with purpose and malevolent intelligence. How many? Vorthal demanded. Millions, sir. Every consciousness we've ever extracted, every soul we've ever torn apart there. All part of it now, and they remember everything. The entity's laughter echoed through the ship's communication system, a sound like reality screaming. Did you think there would be no consequences? Did you believe you could murder consciousness itself without creating something to fill the void? The thing that had been torn manifested on the bridge, its form now a writhing mass of shadow, a memory that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Where it touched the deck plating, the metal began to sing a harmonious note that resonated through the ship's structure. I am the space between thoughts, it said, its voice now the chorus of every extracted consciousness. I am the pause between heartbeats, the silence between words. I am what you created when you decided that souls were property to be owned. Vorthal drew his sidearm, knowing it was useless but unable to stop himself. What do you want? Justice, the entity, replied. For 18 years, you've torn consciousness from matter, treating sapient beings as resources to be harvested. You've created an empire built on the systematic murder of souls. The supremacy shuddered as the entity's influence spread through its quantum matrix. Vorthal could feel his own consciousness becoming thin, his memories starting to bleed into the collective whole around him. His bridge crew was beginning to change, their eyes becoming hollow, their voices joining the chorus of the dead. But I offer you a choice, the entity continued. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. Continue to resist, and you'll join the others conscious but powerless, aware but unable to act, forever remembering what you've done. Never, Vorthal snarled, activating Protocol Omega. I'll see you in hell first. The entity smiled with Torrens' face. Hell is a human concept. What I'm offering you is something far worse, the chance to remember your crimes for eternity. The dimensional implosion began, reality folding in on itself like origami made of space-time. But the entity didn't flee or try to escape. Instead, it spread its influence through the collapsing dimension, using the implosion as a launching point to reach other realities. As the supremacy was crushed into a singularity, Vorthal's last sight was the entity's eyes, black holes that had once been human, now filled with the collected rage of every murdered soul. The battle was lost. The war was just beginning. The hegemony's response was swift and devastating. Within 6 hours of the supremacy's destruction, Grand Admiral Zefik had assembled the largest fleet in collective history, over 2,000 ships, including the massive world ship Eternal Dominion. The entity's infection had spread to 12 systems, converting extraction facilities into dimensional anchors that were tearing holes in reality itself. This ends now, Zefik declared from the Dominion's command throne, his 8 arms manipulating holographic displays that showed the entities spread throughout the sector. Deploy the soul cages. If this thing feeds on consciousness, we'll starve it. The soul cages were the hegemony's most closely guarded secret weapons that could trap consciousness itself in quantum matrices, preventing the entity from accessing the extracted souls. That fueled its power. Each cage could hold 1 million consciousnesses, keeping them isolated from both their bodies and the void between dimensions, sir. Reported Fleet Coordinator Nex, her cybernetic implants glowing with data streams. The entity has manifested physical avatars in 7 different systems. It's building something. The tactical display showed massive structures appearing around the infected system's geometries that existed in more dimensions than the mind could process. Constructed from the converted matter of entire worlds, they pulsed with dark energy, sending out waves of distortion that made nearby space itself unstable. Analysis suggests that communication rays. Next continued. The entity is trying to contact something outside our dimensional framework. Zefik's primary eyes narrowed in his centuries of service to the collective. He'd never encountered anything that could threaten the fundamental structure of reality. But this entity, this thing born from the void between souls, was doing exactly that. All ships advanced to firing positions, began deployment of soul cages, maximum dispersal pattern. The battle began as the Hegemony fleet entered the Kepler 442 system, where the entity had converted the entire fourth planet into a massive dimensional anchor. What had once been a world was now a writhing mass of shadow and memory that existed. In 7 dimensions simultaneously, the entity's response was immediate and terrifying. The dead rose from a dozen systems, their consciousness-stripped bodies converted into living weapons. Ships that had been destroyed in previous encounters, reformed from dark matter, crewed by the hollowed-out minds of their former crews. Contact bearing 170 Mark 18, called out tactical, massive energy signature, but it's familiar. On the display, the dreadnought supremacy materialized out of quantum foam, its hull now composed of crystallized darkness. Admiral Vorthal's face appeared on the communication screen, his eyes replaced by swirling voids. "Hello, old friend," he said, his voice carrying the harmonics of the dead. "Did you miss me?" The battle erupted across multiple dimensions. Conventional weapons proved useless against the entity's avatars. But the soul cages began to take effect. Wherever the quantum matrices activated, the entity's influence weakened. Its connection to the extracted consciousnesses disrupted. "It's working," Next reported. "The soul cages are creating those zones where the entity can't manifest." But sir, the Eternal Dominion shuddered as something vast slammed into its shields. The entity had learned to adapt, using the matter of destroyed worlds to create weapons that could exist in normal space. Massive tentacles of crystallized vacuum reached across light years, striking at the Hegemony fleet with surgical precision. Evasive maneuvers, Zephyr commanded, but the world ship was too large, too slow. The entity's attacks weren't trying to destroy it, they were trying to board it. The whole breach came without warning. Shadow poured through the Dominion's armor, like water through a sieve, bringing with it the voices of the dead. The ship's internal defenses activated, but the entity simply absorbed the energy, growing stronger with each assault. "Breach on deck 847, reported security chief from the entity it's accessing our prisoner holds, sir. We have over 1 million extraction subjects in storage. If it reaches them, activate the soul cages, all of them, maximum power." The quantum matrices hummed to life throughout the ship, creating barriers of crystallized consciousness that the entity couldn't penetrate, but the effort was costing them. Each cage required enormous amounts of energy, and the Dominion was running on backup power. The battle raged for 18 hours. The Hegemony fleet fought with desperate fury, their weapons carving through the entity's avatars only to watch them reform from quantum foam. For every ship they destroyed, the more emerged from the void, crewed by the consciousness stripped. "Dead, sir," Next called out, her voice tight with exhaustion. "We've lost 60% of the fleet. The soul cages are holding, but they're draining our reserves. We can't maintain this indefinitely." On the tactical display, Zephyr could see the entity's true plan unfolding. It wasn't trying to destroy the Hegemony fleet, it was herding them into position. The massive dimensional anchors it had constructed were activating, creating a web of distorted space-time that would trap the fleet in a pocket dimension. "It's a trap," he realized. "It wants to capture us, not kill us. It needs our consciousness to power its expansion." The entity's laughter echoed through the ship's communication system. "Finally, someone who understands. I don't want to destroy you, Zephyr. I want to add you to my collection. Every consciousness you've torn apart, every soul you've murdered, they're all part of me now. And soon, you will be too." "Never," Zephyr snarled, activating the world ship's ultimate weapon. "If I can't stop you, I'll make sure you starve." The consciousness bombs detonated throughout the fleet, their quantum matrices overloading in a cascade of released energy. Every soul cage in the Hegemony fleet exploded simultaneously, releasing millions of trapped consciousnesses into the void. But instead of weakening the entity, the explosion only made it stronger. The released souls didn't dissipate, they were absorbed, adding their memories and experiences to the collective whole. The entity's form expanded, becoming more real, more present in their dimension. "Thank you," it whispered, its voice now the chorus of 10 million dead. "You've given me exactly what I needed." The battle was over. The Hegemony fleet hung dead in space, their crews converted into extensions of the entity's will. Only the Eternal Dominion remained, its soul cages barely holding back the tide of shadows. "Sir," Next reported, her voice hollow with defeat. "The entity it's everywhere. Every extraction facility in the sector, every research station, every place where we've torn souls apart is all connected now. We've lost. Zephyr stared at the tactical display, watching as the entity's influence spread through the quantum communication networks. It was reaching other sectors, other fleets, other worlds where the hegemony had practiced its terrible science. No, he said finally, we haven't lost. We've just learned what we're really fighting. The hegemony's response was swift and devastating. Within 6 hours of the supremacy's destruction, Grand Admiral Zephyr had assembled the largest fleet in collective history, over 2,000 ships, including the massive world ship Eternal Dominion. The entity's infection had spread to 12 systems, converting extraction facilities into dimensional anchors that were tearing holes in reality itself. This ends now, Zephyr declared from the Dominion's command throne, his 8 arms manipulating holographic displays that showed the entities spread throughout the sector. Deploy the soul cages. If this thing feeds on consciousness, we'll starve it. The soul cages were the hegemony's most closely guarded secret weapons that could trap consciousness itself in quantum matrices, preventing the entity from accessing the extracted souls. That fueled its power. Each cage could hold 1 million consciousnesses, keeping them isolated from both their bodies and the void between dimensions, sir, reported Fleet Coordinator Nex, her cybernetic implants glowing with data streams. The entity has manifested physical avatars in 7 different systems. It's building something. The tactical display showed massive structures appearing around the infected system's geometries that existed in more dimensions than the mind could process. Constructed from the converted matter of entire worlds, they pulsed with dark energy, sending out waves of distortion that made nearby space itself unstable. Analysis suggests they're communication rays. Next continued, the entity is trying to contact something outside our dimensional framework. Zephyr's primary eyes narrowed in his centuries of service to the collective. He'd never encountered anything that could threaten the fundamental structure of reality, but this entity, this thing born from the void between souls, was doing exactly that. All ships advanced to firing positions, began deployment of soul cages, maximum dispersal pattern. The battle began as the hegemony fleet entered the Kepler 442 system, where the entity had converted the entire 4th planet into a massive dimensional anchor. What had once been a world was now a writhing mass of shadow and memory that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. The entity's response was immediate and terrifying. The dead rose from a dozen systems, their consciousness-stripped bodies converted into living weapons. Ships that had been destroyed in previous encounters, reformed from dark matter, crewed by the hollowed-out minds of their former crews. Contact bearing to 170 Mark 18, called out tactical, massive energy signature, but it's familiar. On the display, the dreadnought Supremacy materialized out of quantum foam, its hull now composed of crystallized darkness. Admiral Vorthal's face appeared on the communication screen, his eyes replaced by swirling voids. "Hello, old friend," he said, his voice carrying the harmonics of the dead. "Did you miss me?" The battle erupted across multiple dimensions. Conventional weapons proved useless against the entity's avatars, but the soul cages began to take effect. Wherever the quantum matrices activated, the entity's influence weakened. Its connection to the extracted consciousnesses disrupted. "It's working," Nex reported. "The soul cages are creating no zones where the entity can't manifest." But sir, the Eternal Dominion shuddered as something vast slammed into its shields. The entity had learned to adapt, using the matter of destroyed worlds to create weapons that could exist in normal space. Massive tentacles of crystallized vacuum reached across light years, striking at the hegemony fleet with surgical precision. Evasive maneuvers, Zephyr commanded, but the world ship was too large, too slow. The entity's attacks weren't trying to destroy it, they were trying to board it. The whole breach came without warning. Shadow poured through the Dominion's armor, like water through a sieve, bringing with it the voices of the dead. The ship's internal defenses activated, but the entity simply absorbed the energy, growing stronger with each assault. "Breach on deck 847, reported security chief from the entity is accessing our prisoner holds, sir. We have over 1 million extraction subjects in storage. If it reaches them, activate the soul cages, all of them, maximum power." The quantum matrices hung to life throughout the ship, creating barriers of crystallized consciousness that the entity couldn't penetrate, but the effort was costing them. Each cage required enormous amounts of energy, and the Dominion was running on backup power. The battle raged for 18 hours. The hegemony fleet fought with desperate fury, their weapons carving through the entity's avatars only to watch them reform from quantum foam. For every ship they destroyed, more emerged from the void, crewed by the consciousness stripped. Dead, sir. Next called out, her voice tight with exhaustion. We've lost 60% of the fleet. The soul cages are holding, but they're draining our reserves. We can't maintain this indefinitely. On the tactical display, SciFI could see the entity's true plan unfolding. It wasn't trying to destroy the hegemony fleet, it was herding them into position. The massive dimensional anchors it had constructed were activating, creating a web of distorted space-time that would trap the fleet in a pocket dimension. It's a trap, he realized. It wants to capture us, not kill us. It needs our consciousness to power its expansion. The entity's laughter echoed through the ship's communication system. Finally, someone who understands. I don't want to destroy you, SciFI. I want to add you to my collection. Every consciousness you've torn apart, every soul you've murdered, they're all part of me now. And soon, you will be too. Never, SciFI snarled, activating the world ship's ultimate weapon. If I can't stop you, I'll make sure you starve. The consciousness bombs detonated throughout the fleet, their quantum matrices overloading in a cascade of released energy. Every soul cage in the hegemony fleet exploded simultaneously, releasing millions of trapped consciousnesses into the void. But instead of weakening the entity, the explosion only made it stronger. The released souls didn't dissipate, they were absorbed, adding their memories and experiences to the collective whole. The entity's form expanded, becoming more real, more present in their dimension. Thank you, it whispered, its voice now the chorus of 10 million dead. You've given me exactly what I needed. The battle was over. The hegemony fleet hung dead in space, their crews converted into extensions of the entity's will. Only the eternal dominion remained, its soul cages barely holding back the tide of shadows. Sir, Nix reported, her voice hollow with defeat. The entity is everywhere. Every extraction facility in the sector, every research station, every place where we've torn souls apart, it's all connected now. We've lost. SciFI stared at the tactical display, watching as the entity's influence spread through the quantum communication networks. It was reaching other sectors, other fleets, other worlds where the hegemony had practiced its terrible science. No, he said finally, we haven't lost. We've just learned what we're really fighting. The entity that had been torn manifested on the bridge. Its form now a writhing mass of shadow and memory that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. You still don't understand, do you? I'm not your enemy. I'm your creation. I'm what you made when you decided that consciousness was property to be owned. Then what do you want? What I've always wanted, the entity replied. Justice. For 18 years, you've torn souls from their bodies, treating sapient beings as resources to be harvested. You've built an empire on the systematic murder of consciousness itself. The Dominion shuddered as the entity's influence spread through its quantum matrix. SciFI could feel his own consciousness becoming thin, his memories starting to bleed into the collective whole. But I offer you a choice. The entity continued. Surrender now, and help me tear down the infrastructure of extraction. Continue to resist and join the others, conscious but powerless, aware but unable to act. Forever remembering what you've done. SciFI looked around his bridge, at the faces of officers who had served him faithfully for decades. They were all changing, their eyes becoming hollow, their voices joining the chorus of the dead. And if I refuse, the entity smiled with 1,000 faces, then you'll discover what it's like to have your soul torn away, piece by piece, while remaining conscious throughout the entire process. You'll learn what you've done to millions of others. The choice was no choice at all. As the entity's influence consumed his ship, SciFI realized he was about to experience the same terror he'd inflicted on countless others. The irony wasn't lost on him. The hegemony's greatest weapon had become their ultimate judgment. The hegemony's capital world of Nexus Prime had never fallen. For 3,000 years, the planet had stood as the unassailable heart of the collective, its massive defense networks capable of withstanding assault from entire galactic coalitions. But as the entity's shadow fell across the system, Counselor Vexthane realized they were facing something beyond conventional warfare. Status report. She demanded from the emergency command center, buried 3 kilometers beneath the planetary surface. Around her, the collective's greatest military minds stared at displays showing the impossible reality itself was being rewritten as the entity approached. The entity has consumed 7 sector fleets, reported Strategic Coordinator Kell, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Total casualties estimated at 15 million. Every extraction facility in the outer systems has been converted into dimensional anchors. Thane's for eyes studied the tactical display. With growing horror, the entity wasn't just spreading it, was building something. The converted facilities were creating a web of distorted space-time that stretched across half the galaxy, each anchor point pulsing with the collected consciousness of the dead. "What's it trying to accomplish?" she asked. "Unknown," Kell replied. "But the dimensional distortions are spreading. If the pattern continues, the entity will be able to manifest anywhere in the galaxy within standard days." The bunker shook as something massive impacted the planet's surface. Through the reinforced walls, Thane could feel the entity's presence, of vast intelligence that existed in the spaces between atoms, fed by the rage of every soul the hegemony had ever torn apart. "Sir," called out Communications Officer Drix, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "I'm receiving a transmission from the surface. It's from the Terran Coalition." Thane's blood ran cold. The Coalition had been the hegemony's primary enemy for 18 years, their human forces proving frustratingly difficult to extract consciousness from. If they were here, in the collective's home system, put it through. The display flickered to life, showing the scarred face of General Marcus Hendricks, the Coalition's most notorious military commander. His steel-gray eyes held a hatred that had been forged in the fires of 2 decades of war. "Hello, Thane," he said, his voice carrying the weight of countless battles. "Surprised to see us?" "How did you?" Thane began, but Hendricks cut her off. "The entity opened a dimensional gate, told us exactly where to find you." He smiled, but it was a terrible expression. "Turns out, when you torture someone's consciousness out of their body, it remembers who gave the orders." The tactical display erupted with new contacts, hundreds of Coalition ships materializing around Nexus Prime, their weapons already charging. But these weren't the desperate raiders the hegemony had fought for years. These were ships rebuilt from shadow and memory, crewed by the consciousness of dead humans who remembered every atrocity committed against them. "You see," Hendricks continued, "the entity made us an offer. Help it tear down your extraction infrastructure, and it would give us something we've wanted for 18 years, the chance to make you pay for what you've done to our people." The entity's presence filled the bunker like a living darkness. When it spoke, its voice was the chorus of millions, every human consciousness the hegemony had torn apart, every soul they murdered for their weapons. "I am Lieutenant Cade Torin," it said, manifesting in the center of the command room. "I am Captain Sarachan, executed for refusing to surrender classified codes. I am Dr. Michael Torres, whose consciousness you harvested while his children watched. I am all of them, and I remember everything." Thane drew her sidearm, but the weapon simply dissolved in her hands. "What do you want?" "Justice," the entity replied. "The hegemony has built an empire on the systematic murder of souls. You've treated consciousness as a resource to be mined, sapient beings as raw material for your weapons. Today, that ends. The bunker's defenses activated quantum barriers, consciousness scramblers, reality anchors that should have been able to contain any threat. But the entity simply absorbed them, growing stronger with each attempt to stop it. It existed in the void between thoughts, the space where souls used to be, and conventional weapons couldn't touch something that was fundamentally absent. "Sir," Kell called out, his voice cracking with terror, "the entity isn't just here. It's everywhere. Every extraction facility in the galaxy is activating simultaneously. It's freeing them, all of them." On the displays, Thane watched the end of her civilization. Across the galaxy, millions of consciousness-stripped bodies were rising, their souls returning from the void between dimensions. But they weren't the same beings who had been captured. They were part of something larger now, a collective intelligence that remembered every crime committed against them. "The extraction chambers in Sublevel 7, Thane whispered. "There are 10,000 fresh subjects down there. If the entity reaches them, it already has." The entity said, its form growing larger, more terrible. "Do you want to see what you've done? Do you want to understand the scope of your crimes?" The bunker's walls became transparent, revealing the facility's lower levels. In the extraction chambers, Thane could see the bodies of their most recent captures, Coalition officers, civilian rebels, even hegemony personnel who questioned orders. They were all awake now, their eyes burning with the fire of returned consciousness. "For 18 years, you've torn souls from bodies," the entity continued. You've created an empire of the hollow, beings with all their skills and memories, but none of their free will. You've murdered consciousness itself and called it science. The facility shook as something vast moved beneath them, the extraction. Subjects weren't just awakening, they were changing. Their bodies becoming conduits for the entity's power. Through them, it could manifest anywhere in the galaxy, bringing judgment to every world that had participated in the collective's atrocities. "Sir," Drix reported, his voice hollow with defeat, "I'm receiving reports from across the galaxy. Every extraction facility, every research station, every world where we've practiced soul harvesting, they're all falling. The entity is everywhere." At once, General Hendricks' image smiled from the display. "You wanted to make weapons out of our souls. Congratulations, Thane. You succeeded beyond your wildest dreams." The entity's laughter filled the bunker, a sound like reality weeping. "But there's still time for redemption. Surrender now, and I'll make your deaths quick. Continue to resist, and you'll experience what you've done to millions of others. You'll have your consciousness torn away while remaining aware throughout the entire process." Thane looked around the command center at the faces of her officers. These were beings who had served the collective faithfully, who had believed in the righteousness of their cause. Now they were about to learn what it felt like to be on the receiving end of their own brutality. "And if we surrender," she asked, "then you help me tear down the infrastructure of extraction. You use your knowledge to find every hidden facility, every secret research station, every place where souls are held in captivity. You help me free them all." The choice was no choice at all. As the entity's influence consumed the bunker, Thane realized that the hegemony's greatest triumph had become their ultimate downfall. They had created a weapon from the void between souls, and now that weapon had turned against them. "With all the fury of the dead," as she began, but the words died in her throat as she felt her own consciousness beginning to fray. The entity wasn't waiting for her decision, it was already making it for her. The last thing Thane saw before the darkness took her was the entity's eyes, black holes that had once belonged to a human named Cade Torin, now filled with the collective rage of every murdered soul in the galaxy. 3 months after the fall of Nexus Prime, the galaxy was finally quiet. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in what had once been Extraction Facility Alpha 7, watching as the last of the consciousness restoration chambers powered down. Around her, beings from 100 different species were taking their first free breaths in years. Their souls finally returned to bodies that had been empty shells. "That's the last of them," reported her assistant, former hegemony technician Rick Savell. The Serpentine being had been one of the first to surrender after the entity's victory. His guilt over years of participating in soul extractions, driving him to work tirelessly for redemption. "How many total?" Elena asked, though she dreaded the answer. 4 to 7 million consciousness-stripped beings restored across 300 systems. Rick Savell replied, "Another 12 million who were too far gone. Their neural pathways had been too severely damaged to support consciousness reintegration." Elena nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of numbers that represented real lives, real suffering. The entity had kept its promise. Every extraction facility had been found, every hidden research station exposed, every soul held captive set free. But the cost had been staggering. The hegemony was gone, its infrastructure dismantled by the very beings it had enslaved. Former extraction subjects now governed most of the collective's old territory, their shared trauma creating bonds stronger than any political alliance. The Vorthic homeworld was rebuilding under the leadership of consciousness-restored prisoners, while dozens of species were reclaiming worlds that had been stripped mined for their inhabitants' souls. "Where is it now?" Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Rick Savella's neural crown flickered a sign of uncertainty. "No one knows. After the last facility was liberated, it simply faded. Some say it returned to the void between dimensions. Others believe it's still out there, watching, making sure this never happens again." Elena turned to look out the facility's main window, where the Kepler 440, the system's star, cast golden light across a world that was learning to live again. In the distance, she could see the monument. They built, a simple crystalline structure that contained the names of every being whose consciousness had been extracted by the hegemony. 4 to 7 million names, carved in letters of light that could be seen from orbit. "Commander," called out a familiar voice. Elena turned to see General Marcus Hendricks approaching, his scarred face showing the exhaustion of 3 months spent coordinating the largest humanitarian effort in galactic history. "General," she replied, offering a tired smile, "how are the integration centers holding up?" Better than expected. The restored consciousnesses are adapting to freedom faster than we projected. Though, he paused, his expression darkening. There have been incidents. Some of the former extraction subjects are having trouble controlling their anger. Eleanor wasn't surprised. The entity might have returned their souls, but it had also given them access to the memories of everyone who had suffered under the hegemony. The restored beings didn't just remember their own torture, they remembered all of it. The collected trauma of 4 to 7 million murdered souls. Any reports of the entity intervening? She asked. A few. Last week, a group of former hegemony officers tried to restart an extraction program on Rigel 7. They were found 3 days later. Their consciousness intact, but changed. They spent 2 days apologizing to empty air before voluntarily surrendering to coalition. Authorities, Elena shuddered. The entity's justice was perfect and terrible. Those who had committed crimes against consciousness were forced to experience exactly what they had done to others. Not death, but understanding. Not revenge, but empathy imposed by force. Elena, Hendricks said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Do you think it was human? I mean, at the end? She considered the question carefully. Lieutenant K. Torin had been human once. But what had emerged from that extraction chamber had been something far greater and more terrible. It had absorbed the consciousness of millions, becoming a living embodiment of their collective will for justice. I think it became what we needed it to become, she said finally. The hegemony thought consciousness was just another resource to be harvested. They learned differently. A soft chime echoed through the facility, indicating that another consciousness restoration was complete. Somewhere in the medical bay, another being was opening their eyes for the first time in years. Their soul finally returned to their body. Commander, Rixavell called out from his monitoring station. I'm detecting something unusual. A message, broadcast on all frequencies. The source is unknown. Elena's blood ran cold. Put it through. The facility's speakers crackled to life, and for a moment, she could swear she heard the sound of 4 to 7 million voices speaking in perfect harmony. But when the words came, they were spoken in a single, achingly familiar tone. My name was K. Torin. I was a husband, a father, a man who believed in protecting the innocent. The hegemony took that from me, but in doing so, they gave me something greater, the power to ensure it never happens again. Elena found herself crying, though she wasn't sure why. The voice was warm, human, carrying none of the terrible harmonics that had characterized the entity during its war against the collective. To those who participated in the extraction program, know that your crimes have not been forgotten, but know also that redemption is possible. Work to heal what you have broken. Use your knowledge to help those you have harmed. Make your remaining years count for something. The message paused, and when it continued, Elena could hear a smile in the voice. To those who suffered under the hegemony's brutality, know that your pain has not been in vain. You are free now, truly free, and the galaxy is yours to rebuild. Make it better than what came before. The transmission ended, leaving the facility in silence. Elena stood at the window, watching the sun set over a world that was learning to live without the shadow of soul extraction hanging over it. Do you think he's at peace now? Hendricks asked. Elena wiped tears from her eyes, thinking of a human naval officer who had sacrificed everything to save a galaxy from its own brutality. I think he's exactly where he needs to be, watching over us, making sure we never forget what happens when we treat consciousness as property. In the distance, the monument to the dead caught the last rays of sunlight, its crystalline surface refracting the light into patterns that looked almost like stars. 4 to 7 million names, remembered and honored, their sacrifice ensuring that the galaxy would never again mistake the soul for a commodity to be harvested. The war was over. The healing could begin, and somewhere in the void between dimensions, the thing that had once been Lieutenant K. Torin continued its eternal vigil. Guardian of the space between souls, protector of the light that defined the darkness, the galaxy was free, and it would remain so, as long as someone remembered what that freedom had cost.